So welcome to this month's Autistic Perspective series, where we will be addressing the convergence of autism and mental health. We appreciate you making space to be with us as our panelists discuss this critical topic, and we are recording. I'm T, my pronouns are they, them. I'm the executive director and founder of the Autism Support and Advocacy Center, and I will facilitate today. Everybody, if you can just make sure you're on mute before we get started, that would be great. DPS teachers and staff, we're adding the sign-in link in the chat right now, so you can go ahead and do that. And I am encouraging all of you to check out the bios of our panelists if you haven't already. We'll also add that into the chat. They have so much expertise and experience, and we're surely in for a rich conversation. Danny has submitted his answers to the questions in advance, and I will voice those responses and anything that he adds to the chat. He also has his CRP with him, who may also communicate alongside him. As always, we want to name that the full spectrum of autism is not present across the panel. No panel could represent all the intersecting ways humans exist. What you hear today reflects the experiences and knowledge of these panelists and not of the autistic community as a whole. In collaboration with panelists, we have developed 7 questions, which they've all had a few days with to prepare. When we're finished with these questions, we might have time for a couple from you. You can submit your questions in the chat or use the feature in Zoom to raise your hand. Please do keep in mind the level of vulnerability and the amount of energy it requires for panelists to discuss these intersecting identities, to be present today, to mask today, to be here to answer these questions. At times, panelists may elect not to participate by turning their screen off, or they may exit altogether. When we honor that choice or need and offer space to panelists to do what feels right to them, please also give that space and compassion to yourself if either of those are things that you need. With that said, I'm gonna go with our first question. So I'll read the question and then I'm going to read what Danny has submitted. What assumptions do other people make of you because you are autistic? And how does that impact you? Okay, Danny. Wow, as a non-speaking autistic, my life is overflowing with other people's assumptions. For most of my life, I think the most defining assumption was that non-speaking means non-thinking. And from that, assumptions about my worth and capacity and feelings multiplied. It severely limited my life before I could communicate, and continues to shape my path due to lack of formal education and years of being neglected by society. I now see myself as a survivor of decades of being trapped in silence, and as a resilient and loving and compassionate person. This pride is so new and only came with my ability to communicate.
If I may answer, I get to experience it, I think, on several levels because both my son and I have a diagnosis. When I was diagnosed 10 years ago, I was diagnosed as having Asperger's. My son is more classic autism. So typically, when I reveal that I am diagnosed, the initial assumption is that I'm not really autistic because I don't look autistic or I don't act like other autistic individuals that they know. I also find that I'm less accepted. And oftentimes people will tell me, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot that you were autistic. I've never, ever been asked what accommodations I might need or if there's anything that I need in general, period. However, people are more accepting of my son, who's considered more on the severe side. And I really hate saying that because he's an amazing individual who has a fantastic personality and he's so smart, but that's never acknowledged by anyone except me unless I voice that for them or unless people are around long enough to experience how amazing he is. The interesting thing about that is that I teach my son to really embrace himself. I give him all kinds of opportunities, and I've never ever told him that anything was wrong with him. So he doesn't feel like anything's wrong. And I just hope for him, who's also nonverbal, that life doesn't beat him down as he gets out and meets more people. But typically so far, he's been very well received. I tend to be the one to get the negative feedback.
And for me, with what Danny and Jackie shared, a lot of that resonates with me. I didn't get diagnosed with autism until last October. And I'm 33. So it was a lot of not having like an answer explanation as to how I was interacting with other people. Other assumptions that I've gotten from people is that I don't have emotional responses or I don't feel some type of way about things. It's just that I don't emote in the same way that people do, or I've been told that I'm what's it called? Like I've been told that I'm aloof or reserved, or over and over again, people tell me I'm hard to read. I never knew what people were talking about when they said this. And then also I'm not nonverbal, but there's moments where I'm nonverbal. And I think the most that impacted me was when I first started trying therapy, and I didn't understand that just regular talk therapy wouldn't work that well for me. But then I would have therapists make assumptions that I wasn't ready or that I was refusing treatment, or try to suggest that like maybe I find like they would refer me out, I guess, because the silence made them uncomfortable. I would say that's probably how it impacted me the most until I was able to find therapists who could understand and be okay with me being nonverbal, or therapists who are curious about the silence, and also finding therapists that do like somatic work or like arts-based therapy too.
Just to kind of bounce off of Caitlin, I think one of the biggest issues, whether considered high functioning, low functioning, or whatever in between, are the assumptions. Regardless to where you land on the autism spectrum, we always are filled with a life of assumptions when dealing with other people. And I hope one day we can get to the point where people stop assuming and actually attempt to get to know us. I think if we could get past the expertise aspect of the experience and actually really embrace the journey of getting to know an individual, eventually, hopefully that we'll stop having to deal with so many assumptions about who we are and what we're able to do.
I'm I'm finding myself really overwhelmed. Just so one assumption that I see frequently is around empathy and sensitivity to emotional experience. And an assumption that I come across is that I, as autistic, or that other autistic people are not highly sensitive to the emotion in the room. And I will say that even through Zoom, I'm watching faces and just really feeling a lot that I might not describe in the same way as a holistic person, but that is really impacting my experience. It's really painful to be limited by people's heuristics or biases. I don't know what assumptions people make of me because I'm autistic, but I know that people make assumptions because our culture has steeped us in a set of ideas that that carry these preconceived notions. Professionally, because I practice in mental health, I find that it's incredibly hard for me to navigate professional spaces. People have their professional identities really attached to their like treatment modalities that are firmly attached to these stereotypes. I've just recently was trying to work with a very experienced therapist who I would like to learn from. And she said in the first 5 minutes, well, you're not autistic because autistic people aren't interested in self-improvement. And I said, all right, well, that's enough for me.
Thanks for adding that into the chat, Max.
You know, it's statements like that, excuse me, that make it particularly difficult for to be able to maintain one's mental health within the workspace. But I think that's going to come up a little later, so I'll talk about that then, because that's really huge for many of us.
I'll move to the next one. What impact on mental health can functioning labels have on autistic individuals or the autistic community as a whole? Danny, I think the whole premise of function is so flawed. It's so dehumanizing and such a warped and limited view of autism. It's so oppressive to those of us labeled as low functioning and sets up a whole system of limited opportunities and marginalization. It allows the world to see us as lesser. And after years of such treatment, how can we help but internalize that?
My experience has been, even though I was diagnosed very late in life, it was evident that I was very different from my peers and family members. So the assumption was always, people always felt sorry for me for whatever, no matter if I thought I was very proud of doing something, if I put my best foot forward, whatever I did, I got the response that, you know, there was some approval, acceptance, if you will, of whatever it is. It might not have been a normal thing in terms of what they consider a normal, but there was always kind of a, oh, we kind of feel sorry for you, or if they were thinking that they were making room for me, they wouldn't really talk to me. If I talked, everyone was quiet, but no one really responded. There might have even been times where there were certain kind of treatments just to get a reaction out of me, because typically I didn't have much of a reaction, according to the people that I dealt with early in life. So I think just being devalued as a whole, because of any kind of differences that you show, can be very damaging. And as an adult, masking tends to come for me as a way to be taken seriously, because if I talked in like my regular voice, because I have kind of a squeaky kind of nasally voice, and people just don't seem to listen to me. So I practiced deepening my voice so I could be heard. I really don't know what else to say. It's just very difficult when you're not accepted for being who you are across the board. That can be very damaging because you're so busy trying to hide. Do you ever really get to know who you are?
I think the label of functioning, like whether like people label something as high functioning or low functioning, because I see that a lot with other diagnoses too. Um, I think it's another facet of ableism, and it doesn't line up with my personal values. Like I think regardless of someone's, I don't know what people want to call it, like productivity or talents or abilities, like everybody's deserving of love, everybody's deserving of care and health and family, like whether that's family of origin or chosen family, like everybody's deserving of these things. And it's just a very capitalist thing to view a person in that way, like they're just a workhorse. And I don't even think horses should have to work either, but like they're just like a workhorse and like having to do all these things. And so I think it, when it's internalized, it comes out as internalized ableism and a lot of like deprogramming from it of like, okay, this doesn't line up with my values. What are words that I'm using that I need to stop using? How can I relate to myself in a different way? I think because which is another form of ableism, I was placed in gifted classes my entire life, which that has a lot of its issues like ableism, classism, racism, everything. Um, I always felt like, oh, I have to do all this. And then growing up Black in North Carolina, I was always told like you have to do twice as much to be able to be accepted or to get your foot in the door. So as an adult, when there are times where I have a meltdown or there are times I need a break or I can't do something, I get down on myself because of all the internalized ableism or like, oh, I'm supposed to be this person or do all these things. But I do think the label functioning is another form of ableism and capitalism.
Yeah, very much amplifying what Caitlin shared. I think I don't support the use of functioning labels. I think their function is to make it clear that we're just framing people in terms of their economic value in this system. I don't find it particularly helpful to, in order to navigate relationships or find my place in terms of belonging and creation of my own sense of value. I think it's really dangerous. There's a space where the neurodiversity movement or the autism employment movement is taking ownership or this space of, oh, we have an employment initiative and here are all the reasons that autistic people can be a great fit. They work really hard, they don't need breaks, they don't like to chat around the water cooler, like insert ableist norm here. I think it's a really dangerous trend that I'm alarmed by the employment initiatives that are simply carrying that kind of capitalist functioning mentality into a space where autistic folks are being exploited. And that is at the cost of our mental health or our full belonging in society.
Thank you all. Our third question, I will ask as it is, but after submitting the questions, I came across this study that I just want to name here, and panelists, if you want to speak to it as it relates to this question or otherwise, feel free to, but there's no expectation that you do. But I think it's an interesting framing for attendees to think about as they listen to your responses. There's a recent study that extended the minority stress model to understand the co-occurrence of mental health issues in autistics. It said autistic individuals constitute an identity-based minority and are exposed to excess social stress, such as everyday discrimination, internalized stigma, and concealment or masking. And their results indicate that minority stress could explain like much of the increased mental health problems in the autistic populations. So I'm curious what you think about that. And I put that because question number 3 is, do you think pressure to adhere to neurotypical norms to mask contributes to mental health issues, and why or why not? Danny. I am so sure it does. For me, this started with ADA when I was a boy back in the 1980s. I'm still afraid to risk making mistakes and to risk displeasing others. As an apraxic autistic, masking is so not an option, but I feel so much shame when my body acts autistic. This is a common cause of my dysregulation.
For me, part of the stress, and in my experience, it's a stress not just as a minority, but it's a stress that washes across the board of my entire existence, starting very early. Other than just, other than not being valued, but for people, for interactions with people, I find that we are taught to interact based on the majority's comfort level. With social, looking in the eyes, body movements, anything that makes a person in the majority uncomfortable seems to be something that is going to be erased if they can, through therapies or even through negative comments about that which make us withdraw within ourselves. The pressure to adhere to neurotypical values is astronomical. Because I couldn't adhere to the norms, people couldn't value the way that I really was. And if I couldn't adhere to the norms, then I became invisible. And I think many of us become invisible, and even to the assumption that we're not able to feel even pain. Some of the things that people do to some of us to physically hurt us, and assume that we can't feel the pain, where it might be that we just have a different response to the pain, a different response to emotional pain and physical pain. I find it very interesting, though, for a person who was diagnosed late, and now that I'm very open about being on the spectrum, if I do not reveal that I have a diagnosis early on, I could have a regular conversation with doctors or with coworkers. But as soon as I reveal that I have a diagnosis, all of a sudden, I fall into this label where people feel like they have to talk to me slower. They have to, the expectation of my ability lowers. And I'm just not really, I'm not really able to kind of get my thoughts together the day that I want to, but I hope everyone kind of reads and follows what I'm saying. It's really a detriment to constantly not fit. It's a detriment where you feel like you have to hide to be able to contribute anything, just like anyone else. We want to contribute something. We have a lot to give, and we're limited in being able to do that because of the assumptions and because of the norm that we don't quite fit into.
The key word that stands out for me here is the pressure. And that's how I perceive it. It's a threat. It's a recognition that there's a conditionality here, not here in this room, but on this planet, that I don't have access unless I'm performing in certain ways that don't come naturally, sometimes aren't possible for me. And that in order to have a sense of belonging, there's that pressure. I do not deal well with pressure. I shut down, I lose, I lose verbal skills, I lose my presence when I perceive that pressure. And it means that, there's a loss to my community group because I'm unable to show up fully. And I mean, that's really painful for me to see and recognize, and even to know, like, I could tell you all how to create the welcome I need, but people in many communities are not prepared to create that. They don't want to hear it. It's threatening to them. Like, you want to change something that works for everybody? So there's a real cost to that pressure, and to the, yep, yeah. I hope you saw my air quotes on that, everybody. And yeah, it's not something that's borne out by history. I can find the places that my grandparents found their social fit because there were other roles available that aren't available now, other ways of contributing and fitting into society I don't have available to me right now. So there's a real loss, and it's about the pressure rather than there being an invitation to show up and bring the fullness of myself and what I see and how I experience the world. That's where the beauty is in being here in shared spaces, is that when we all show up, there's magic that happens. So the pressure really, really cuts right through that potential.
I don't think I realized how much different types of oppression have affected me until things shut down with the pandemic. And now that people are acting like the pandemic's not over, clearly people with who are immunocompromised and higher health risks is they're being forgotten, erased in a lot of similar ways. Going back out, it's nice being able to wear a literal mask, because then I'm like, okay, I don't have to try to make whatever facial expression, or it doesn't matter if I'm looking at someone or not. But dealing with all the different types of oppression, like if I end up stimming in public, or if someone's trying to figure out what I am because of my gender expression, or if someone's treating me a different way because of my skin color, I'm like, how in the world did I put up with this before I had to stay home? Like, I still want to keep ordering my groceries. I still order my groceries. I still do curbside anywhere that does it, because I cannot anymore. So it's affected my mental health in a lot of ways I didn't realize until I had the comfort and safety of being home and being with my family and pod family, and then going back out in society. It's just, I can't do it anymore, to be honest.
Oh, that's a lot. It's a lot. It's too much. I was thinking of maybe skipping around to add on, but I will stay in order. What relationship do you find between self-regulation and mental health? Danny. It is so strongly linked for me. Anxiety and OCD and trauma all trigger my dysregulation, and therapy has helped tremendously in managing the triggers and my resilience in regulation. For over 30 years, I had no way to express my mental health issues to anyone, so this is a new process for me and so powerfully helpful.
I agree totally, because I come from such a violent and traumatic background. I was forced in a position, excuse me, to learn how to cope and learn how to regulate, because at times my life really depended on it. It wasn't me having any kind of expression wasn't desired. And oftentimes it would come with grave consequences. So I had to learn how to calm myself, to be able to function within the situation that I was in, which was volatile. And I never really knew what I would meet from one moment to the next. I developed a very external view of life. I always had to be very aware of where people were and what emotions I could pick up from them, because emotions never match the words. So speaking of pressure, what Hannah was saying about pressure, I tend to do well under pressure because I live what I consider a pressure cooker life where it was constant. And my staying in line was constant. And like I said, my staying in line was also a way to stay healthy and alive. So being able to regulate, going through the stresses that we're going through now with all the uncertainty and all of the social changes and the atmosphere being so negative, I have to say I function well in it because it feels like home. So I think being able to regulate is everything. And that's something I've certainly taught my son how to do when he finds himself in a situation where maybe he's getting overstimulated or something. Watching him self-regulate and calming himself, I feel a lot of joy because I hope that he'll be able to continue learning and developing coping skills as he grows older.
I think I've been learning that helping to keep my nervous system and my body regulated immediately helps my mental health feel better, or like getting emotional regulation, um, with having like like I don't think I listed this earlier, but the different diagnoses that I have are autism, ADHD, bipolar, and PTSD. And so it's a lot going on in my head every day. But if I can have a weighted blanket, or like something that can like put pressure on my body, or just like something that can help relax and calm my nervous system, like immediately my emotions feel a lot better.
One of the downsides, if I could call it that, excuse me, to self-regulating or having to self-regulate so much, is that I find myself putting myself into a situation where I'm increasing the pressure because I'm always fighting to work through things or fighting to achieve things according to what's expected, or according to what's expected. If it's a lower expectation, then I work triple hard to be able to surpass that expectation. So I oftentimes experience burnout. And I realized just recently I have been burnt out for the last 3 years, just working nonstop. So whenever I come to a stop, that is almost like my emotions. It's like, taking a train and just making the train stop all of a sudden and everything falls forward. So it's like everything in my head moves forward and could force me into a depression. So I can't just stop working suddenly or stop doing things suddenly that I've been working on. I have to actually slow myself down in stages so that my mental health can kind of even out with everything else that's going on. So that is the one downfall that I experience from being in a situation where I'm always having to cope or find methods to cope.
I love hearing all these responses and how different and similar things are represented in the room. When I look at this specific question, for me, the relationship between self-regulation and mental health Self-regulation leads me to a sort of retreat and isolationism, distancing from other people. And it's ultimately, it might be an emergency tactic that got me through 30 years fairly well, but ultimately hasn't been good for my mental health. It led to me really experiencing a lot of depression. And I think I've really put a focus on co-regulation and creating safe spaces with other, not just other humans. I find as an autistic person that humans are a lot more complicated than what feels good sometimes. I can find co-regulation much more effectively with a tree or, you know, whatever my sensory joy is. And I also really, when I hear self-regulation, I hear a concept that I think is overused around the idea that it means calm or that it means a certain kind of fit. I'm thinking about red light, green light, yellow light charts that isn't something I think is ultimately a good fit for anybody in terms of, I want to recognize that regulation means I have the energy that is a match for this environment. Sometimes, you know, that means that I need to be really bouncy and, you know, get a lot of pressure in my body. Caitlin, you talked about pressure. I am covered by these 5-pound weights right now so that I can sit here and be present in what this kind of regulation, being in front of this screen, asks of me. And after this, I'm going to be running around my block no matter how hot it is, so that I can be regulated for my next on-screen check-in. So regulation is really important, but it's not always self-regulation, and it's definitely not always calm, cool, collected.
Yeah, I like that you added that component to it. I mean, regulation for me is usually like really fast, really hard, and really heavy. Yeah. Okay, our next question. We talked, I heard many of the panelists reference this in answers already, but I want to make space to expand here, which is, how do you feel your racial and or gender identities interact with your autistic identity in terms of mental health? Danny. As a cisgender man who is half white, I don't have much to say here other than I support all racial and gender identities, and I'm so wanting to learn how to be a good ally.
I get a lot of questions about what was it like growing up being Black and autistic. I don't really have a lot of answers for that because I didn't grow up knowing that I was autistic. I just grew up knowing I was different. And my difference was the part that I liked about myself the most, because I didn't want to act like the normal people because it was usually negative. But the effect that I do have in recent years is wanting to talk about autism and what it is to be autistic for me. Amongst my peers has not gone well because oftentimes, as I said earlier, I may be accused of lying, or people are saying you're not really autistic. There have been times when someone has said to me that it was kind of stupid for me to admit that I was autistic when I didn't look autistic, which I thought was very strange. I don't really know how to take that even now. So it's been hard to relate to people of my same race. I don't think that I've fit in like I thought I did. most of my friends say that I'm just that odd person, but they've learned to appreciate me over time. They don't consider my actions or even my responses to be the responses typical to what they know as Black people, which again, I find that to be odd because I've been Black all my life, and my manners and my speaking and how I express my knowledge is what I've done all my life as a Black person. So I don't understand it being anything other than what it is to me. I think that's the only thing that I can really understand, and also not really understand some of the issues about being Black and and the trauma that is behind that. I don't necessarily feel that level of trauma because that has not been my perception. The negative aspects of being Black has not been my perception. I've always loved everything about myself in terms of how I was created, but I do not love the response that I get from other people regarding my differences because I don't understand them. On top of that, also, I don't understand why it is that people think that because I'm of a particular race or a particular gender even, why I should act according to what they think that race or that gender should act. That is very strange to me because I always look at us as an individual, as a person. I like to see who they are as an individual. I don't lump people together in groups. I always see people as singular. And that way we get to learn, what we do alike and appreciate each other's differences.
I think for me, and I'm not, maybe it's because of an experience I had last week, like in general, it happened a lot when I lived in North Carolina too. But I'm in Arizona now, for those of you that don't know that. But born and raised in North Carolina, in Raleigh. But out here in the Phoenix area, I get followed by the police a lot, to the point where like I just make sure I know where my ID is. I try to like rehearse a script in my mind ahead of time if I do get pulled over, or just asking, here's where my ID is, like, can you please reach for it? And just kind of thinking it through. Last week I had to go out a couple more times than usual because I needed to give my partner a ride to the doctor. And over the course of that day, between that, an errand I needed to run, going to work and coming home from work, I got followed by police 3 different times that day in my car. And I'm just kind of like, can I just put a sign like, yes, y'all have ran my plate, like this car is in my name. um I guess one of those things, like laughing so I don't cry. But I just, one of my fears is if I do get pulled over or have to have some sort of interaction with law enforcement, is that I'll shut down and be nonverbal, and not knowing what that'll look like. Like I've even thought about, I was like, well, if I can't talk, I can just slowly put my hands above my head and lay down on the ground, because that's what they ask people to do anyways. So I do kind of have a plan for if I do have to be nonverbal, and that happens. But that's one of the things that's coming to mind for me now because of that day last week. Is usually I might get followed maybe like twice in a week, but 3 times in a day was a lot. I was very stressed.
The layers of that you have to hold for your safety on multiple levels of identity all of the time. It sucks. Where else is like that? I hope, I mean, we're not the only place where conversations like this are happening. I mean, there are conversations like this are happening all over the world. And I have to hold hope and optimism that in the generations to come, that becomes no one's story.
Yeah, I have participated in several conversations, both here and abroad, on the subject. And in the room, the majority of the room experiences much like Caitlin. And there would be just a very few of us who can't relate. I relate to Caitlin based on what I have seen other people experience and what I have seen on television. I have experienced in the past occasionally being followed around a store or something like that. But that's not been anything that I think has happened much. It's not anything that I'm aware of. Largely because when I go out, I have this kind of tunnel vision. I'm focused on what I'm doing, and I don't really look at other people around me other than to just do a check to see if they're getting too close, or if there's a sense that maybe there's someone who's meaning to do harm or anything like that. But again, it's very hard to hear. I do not fully experience that. Understand that experience. It's hard to even think of Caitlin going through such a thing, because when I look at Caitlin, I see a very kind person who just wants to go about their life. So I don't understand how they could draw that kind of attention. Again, I don't think there's anything that Caitlin's doing in particular. I think that's more other people choosing to do that to possibly intimidate them, or, for their own whatever. But Caitlin, I don't see anything of you or sense anything of you that would even seem like that would warrant that kind of behavior. I really appreciate I've always, since I met you, appreciated your presence and your thoughtfulness. So I'm so very sorry that's been your experience.
Thank you all for voicing that. I appreciate it.
We have maybe 10, 12 more minutes for 2 more questions. I think we'll certainly be able to do that. What barriers have you experienced or understand others in the autistic community to experience in accessing mental health care? Danny, I am lucky in this now. Since being able to access communication in my daily life about 2 years ago, I've been able to ask for mental health support. But without this communication, I would have no way to access therapy. Many non-speakers who rely on a communication partner like me would need a trusted communication partner to access sessions. And this can be tricky because for many, their main communication partner is a parent. Even with amazing parents, this is a barrier to opening up to a therapist. And the cost is also a challenge, of course.
I think one of the largest barriers is the lack of understanding of autism in general. The lack of ability to connect to a person that is considered to be different. The lack of empathy to even want to try to get to know this person on whatever level. The lack of ability to acknowledge that there are many forms of communication, and the assumption that if a person is verbal, that they are able to communicate effectively, because there are many times being verbal that I have not been able to communicate effectively. It may take time to be able to say what I feel. and to be able to voice my experience. So again, when you're looking at the experience between a provider, the block of expertise is, I think, one of the most detrimental things, aside from the detriment of the way the process of education for these fields that lead a person to find expertise within the concentrations that they're most interested in, with a lack of ability to understand the mastery of the journey into mental health, or the journey into science, to look beyond and understand that what you've learned is a base to go from, and to understand that when you see something outside of what you're familiar with, that there's an opportunity to learn. One of the things I find hardest is when taking my son to get help, or him getting therapies, and he does something that is not considered normal even by the education standard, and the response is, well, we've not ever seen that before, I've never experienced that before, and then it's just dropped. It's not addressed. So if we could change the way that our professionals, or incorporate in their education, the ability or the mastery of the journey of getting to know people, in the journey of being able to expound on what you've already learned, I think that in of itself would make some difference. I think cultural humility would make a huge difference. The willingness to learn about people and their cultures over and beyond your experience would make a difference.
Yeah, one thing I've noticed as a therapist is that it seems like there have been more therapists who've been more open about being autistic and being neurodivergent in different ways. But there is still, like, overall, there is kind of a backlash amongst therapists, like, to be different or othered in different ways, because still most therapists, I believe it's still 90% cishet white women. Um, the same barriers to treatment are the same barriers to getting more people as clinicians that are like us, in terms of being autistic, because the way that the programs are, it's set up to be married to a rich man who can support you, like, while you're going to school to be a therapist, and not get paid a lot as a mental health clinician. I think it's changed in different ways. Like, there are more grants and funding that have popped up. Um, but it is hard to find a therapist who has lived experience. So, and I have noticed, like, since putting myself out there and, like, making sure my bio does actually reflect who I am, which I can finally do working in private practice, working for myself, a lot of my clients have the same intersectional identities that I do. And so I don't have to feel like I have to mask to make a buck, where it's like, okay, we're both sitting in silence if we need to. We don't have to make eye contact, or we're both able to make art or listen to music, like whatever that person's needing in the moment. Oh, and definitely money being a barrier too, because most insurances don't cover assessments for autism after you turn 18.
Hannah adds financial barriers, communication barriers, biases in providers, and biases embedded in systems of care. It is tremendously challenging for autistic folks to access mental health care that is actually beneficial. Yes, Jackie, cultural humility is exactly what we need in mental health care providers. Yeah, if we only have access to providers who do not understand the ways mental health shows up in autistic people, if we only have access to providers who are trained under the deficit model, if we only have access to providers who can only communicate through mouth words, then we don't actually have access to therapy at all. y'all's responses was blending really well into the next question, which is, what have you found helpful in terms of supporting your mental health? What should providers and families know? What should other autistic and neurodivergent people know? Danny. Therapy and an amazing support team who work to understand what I am going through and respect my autonomy to make informed decisions for myself. I also am working on self-compassion in a workbook with one of my sisters, and it is so helpful to learn to be kind to myself. Providers should know that for non-speaking and high support needs autistics like me, mental health should be a priority, and we need our teams on board too.
In terms of supporting my mental health, I have found the transformative potential in work setting boundaries, lots of scripts setting boundaries, lots of investment in passive tools for setting boundaries, like email filters or, whatever. I've gotten really creative about how to take care of my actual authentic needs that are not validated, or they don't match. They don't match what I get when I walk into a holistic therapist's office. So whether that's creating systems, lots of affirming sensory tools and energy regulation, lap full of weights, that's what I need. I don't need to practice conversation openers. I need a lap full of weights. And that was stuff that unfortunately I had to mostly work through on my own. And I'm so glad to see affirming mental health care providers where I can find them. It's growing and it's coming. I know that there are some in this Zoom room who I've been thrilled to see out in the world practicing, because it's not holistic mental health care. It is a really creative process that is very personal, to figure out what I need in order to really thrive and to find the community in which I can thrive.
A lot of what's been said resonates with me. And adding to that, TV and film have always been really good for my mental health and self-care, like whether it's something that's like a comfort show that I can stem from, or seeing myself represented in a way that's not like, definitely not sensational porn or like disability porn, but and I don't know if it's purposeful or on accident. Like, for those of you who've seen Abbott Elementary, I think the teacher's name is Greg, but the actor who's on Everybody Hates Chris, like he eats the same meal every single day. There's food he doesn't like because of textures. He'll say like, I'm excited. This is my excited face. And he'll just like, his face is the same. I'm like, I don't know if this is purposeful or not. But I see myself a lot in that character. And I was really like, my dad always liked Star Trek, so I would watch that growing up, and I still enjoy the newer series too. But seeing the episode where like people assumed that Spock didn't have emotions, and then when he did emote, everyone on the ship was emoting in the same way because Vulcan's emotions are so deep, they have to keep it barriered or can't emote, and people assume that he didn't have any emotions. So like just seeing myself represented in that way, again, I don't know if it's purposeful or if there's like if directors are thinking about that or not, but characters that could be coded as autistic, it's just really nice to see that on screen.
For me, one of the things that helped me the most is having a very strong sense of self, even if I'm not able to be myself in certain instances. knowing who I am, self-acceptance, and not having to adopt other people's feelings or adopt their angst towards me or anyone that experiences or has differences. I think that's been the thing that's helped me the most. And when I am talking to other people, regardless to whether they're neurodivergent or not, I always give space for them to really take a long look at self and look at the things that they love the most about themselves or like about themselves. Also look at the things they dislike about themselves and to try to figure out why you dislike it. Is that something that you've disliked all your life, or is that something that someone else has said and it has just kind of stuck with you and you can't shake it? Oftentimes when they do that, they're able to get to a space of peace about themselves that gives them a thicker skin to be able to withstand when other people are show negativity towards them. I tell them, you know, everyone is entitled to their opinion, and I share my mantra, and it says, people are people. They will do what they want to do, be it good or bad. They will say what they want to say, be it truth or lie. We all have the power to choose what we're going to do. So we can't control other people's choices, but we can work on how we respond to other people and understand that none of us are perfect, that we ourselves sometimes will say things or do things that could be hurtful to someone else, whether we realize it or not. So to give grace and to give space for not only our own differences, but the differences of the people that we come in contact with. Being able to work through things is a two-way street. It's never one person's responsibility to make anyone else feel a certain way or to provide their comfort, and we don't control anyone else's emotions. That's a very individual thing. So in doing that and living that way, it gives me the space to be able to weather, and I weather a lot. But at the end of the day, I come home and I am very satisfied with who I am.
Thank you all for answering all of those questions, and thank you. Before I close us out, I'd like to hear from attendees if there's any questions for the panelists. We've got room for one or two if you have them. We have a question, which is, what do you love about being autistic?
That's pretty easy. I love everything about my autism. It's what makes me so super unique. I love my process. I love the way that I see the world, the way that I see such beauty in all people, unless they show me otherwise. I love the way that the depth of feeling that I have, whether I can show it or not. I love the process of seeing things beyond what my eyes can see, feeling things beyond what the general senses are. But I most of all love my brain. I love how my brain works. I think that's always been the most favorite part of me. And just the general joy that I feel majority of the time, regardless of the circumstances. And I love the way that I relate to my son. And and letting him see my imperfections and all my flaws and telling him, you know, it's really cool knowing yourself and just being yourself. One of the biggest things I think is my superpower is being able to help my son and other people really embrace who they are through long conversations and experiences, and teaching them that, you know what, whatever you see about yourself that you want to change, don't change it because you see yourself as broken or anything, but change it because you want to have an arsenal of choices that you could use, an arsenal of behaviors that you could use when you deem appropriate, but always value who you are organically. So that's what I love most about myself, that I just think that being myself is awesome and I wouldn't want to be any other way.
Yeah, I resonate with that a lot. Like, I just love being different in my own unique way. I was pretty young. I don't remember how old, but like when I saw the first Matrix movie, I remember thinking like, oh, everybody's stuck in the Matrix, but like I can see the code. Like I don't have to operate the same way everybody else is. Um, or like thinking of myself like as an alien or a robot, like, but in a way that worked for me, not as like a othering way. But yeah, just a lot of what Jackie said resonates with me, like just loving how like unique I am and how I think through things in a different way too.
Yeah, similarly, I love my high perception, the things that I do perceive very keenly. I think I miss some things, and what I do perceive is just apparently other people are not noticing the level of detail that I notice, and the historical maps, the statistical probabilities that I'm able to build just in what comes to me when I validate what I'm perceiving. It's a real skill, and I just love it when that is welcomed as a part of a team, when what I can bring to the table just naturally is has a sense of belonging. I think that what we build through our different strengths is just really beautiful.
Okay, so Danny is typing it in and also like to verbally share that. Danny, you ready?
Yes. David, my friend, John, and I see the world. It is magical to be able to share that. No,
All right.
yes.
All right.
Awesome. That'll do it for today. Danny, Jackie, Caitlin, Hannah, thank you. Thank you for your willingness to be in this conversation, for sharing yourselves, your vulnerability. These are the kinds of conversations that need to be heard to grow understanding and to help people who need it to see themselves and know they have community. Thank you. Attendees, we hope this conversation provides you the opportunity to reflect on and push the narratives you may hold around autism, mental health, and the way they intersect, and that you carry new understandings forward in your work with your families and with yourself. We're in the process of raising funds to increase accessibility in this series. Contributions also go towards the compensation of panelists. If you're able to contribute, we certainly would appreciate it, and we'll throw a link in the chat now if you're able to do so. Right after that, we'll add a link in for DPS teachers to sign out. And thanks again for being here. We're going to take a break for the summer, but you'll hear from us in the fall about the rest of the 2022 schedule. Thanks, everyone.
But